Tzeentch was always one of the strongest factions in multiplayer in Total War Warhammer 3, and they are certainly going to be a problem for many of the old and new world factions. Today I've got a selection of Tzeentch replays for you, starting with myself facing off against the Empire. I've gone with a cultist focused build here, so the cultist is going to be the caster with the OP Wanda Whimsy map-wide effect with Kindle Flame, giving a huge damage spike and a plus 12 melee attack to all units. Of course, damage spike to all units with flaming damage. The Exalted Lord of Change is just here as a monster with a summon of 2 Furies. We got a couple of Screamers for anti-large AP to counteract Empire Heavy Cavalry. Getting rained on by a Mortar Wagon is a front line of Blue Horrors. Got some Blazing Squealers and regular Pink Horrors. Forsaken and Spawn in the back, acting as a buffer sweeper squad, and with some Furies over on the side. For my opponent's Empire, yes, he's brought a Mortar Wagon, but before you scoff, this is actually probably, I mean, just the wagon artillery in general. I'd probably take the Hellblaster, but it's probably the best choice against Tzeentch because the armor protects the artillery crews, right? Unlike a normal mortar, which the horrors could just walk up and blast the crews away, or, you know, take like a magic missile to the side and have it kill the entire crew in one go. It's pretty brutal stuff. He's also got some Free Company in the front line, Spearmen, Swordsmen, Crossbowmen, Silver Bullets, Regiment of Renowned Gunners, and the Great Swords. Got a Light Wizard on foot, Boris Todbringer on horseback, leading the way with some Knights of the Blazing Sun. So let's get to it. Of course, this is Tzeentch without their DLC units. By now, you guys will definitely have seen the announcement. Probably by the time you're seeing this, it was maybe even like as much as a week ago. But Tzeentch will be getting Warriors of Chaos with Halberds. We'll be getting like Marauders and Marauder Spearmen. So this is going to change, obviously. You'll have even more tools to deal with the armor, heavy armor, cavalry, and other large units, which is generally their biggest weakness right now. But great charge by the Knights of the Blazing Sun just right up the center. Unfortunately for them, my Spawn and Forsaken are in a position to just immediately meet, and between the Warp Flame effect, the Spawn and the Forsaken, these Knights of the Blazing Sun are down to only 60 armor in comparison to their regular 100, with a minus 40 total debuff there, which is very strong synergy. One of the reasons why Warp Flame is so strong, although the Blazing Squealers are taking significant damage themselves. Also rushing all these important missile units in the backline, we just catch this Knight of the Blazing Sun here with the Screamers, which is kind of a nightmare situation for them. They don't get their high charge. They have relatively low melee defense, and the anti-large AP of the Screamers is absolutely brutal. You can see there, speaking of brutal, those Free Company militia also getting absolutely focus fired. The mortars continuing to rain shots, but I don't know, the mortar wagons, they're expensive enough that they have a hard time paying for themselves. I almost think they just need a straight up cost reduction. But anyway, the Lord of Change also just kind of cycle charging out on the flanks here, terrifying away various Empire Spearmen and whatnot. And yeah, nice net here. Does net these Screamers, and they get a little bit counteracted here. We've got some Free Company coming back, Silver Bullets trying to reposition, but a lot of ranged units for my opponent to try and protect, especially against a faction with access to fast flyers, and Furies in particular being the best fast flyers in the game currently. I would definitely look for Furies to get nerfed, hopefully before Immortal Empires comes out. But anyway, the Great Swords are going to be the next focus fire target, and you can see the fireballs have been slung around. I've also been slinging that Cascading Fire Cloak a little bit here and there, just to keep the Kindle Flame procs up as much as possible. And already the Empire forces are suffering pretty badly. Boris is caught up in a horde of pinks. I think these are the summoned pinks from the cultist. Yep, that's correct. They're getting debuffed by the White Cloak of Ulrich, but still just holding Boris back. They have enough mass that they're making life inconvenient for him. Another summoned Fury also coming up here. The Spawn Forsaken Blob helps the Screamers to finish off this unit of Knights of the Blazing Sun here. Other Knights of the Blazing Sun fighting more Screamers, so just a rough situation all around for the Empire. Boris going to try and tangle up close with Big Bird. Got the support of his Spearmen. Shouldn't mention the Empire is under the Cult of Sigmar banner, which is unfortunately yet another yellow Empire sub-faction. Very similar to the color scheme of both Yelt and Marcus Wolfhart, which is unfortunate. I was really hoping for something more unique and interesting, but alas, is not to be. More spawns running down to Moultrie, the Free Company militia. two, key melee units here acting exactly in their intended role, just to help beat back specific, like, countercharge units. I mean, we'll see how the meta develops. Obviously, I think a lot of people are still feeling these matchups out. The Empire, for myself, I could see maybe if you went with a very concerted cavalry rush, and definitely with Volkmar. I mean, Volkmar's AoE damage, the fact that Chariot's great for disrupting ranged units. He also does magic damage himself, has good missile resistance, and self-healing, so he can be safe relatively from Tzeentch's fire. While I don't totally hate Boris on the horse, he just doesn't have nearly the same presence as Volkmar, so I would definitely start there, and then I'm not sure, honestly. Maybe go with a very, intense cavalry rush. Question is then, how do you deal with those key specific melee units like the Screamers, potentially in the future a couple of key warriors with halberds, or in the current sort of build that we have, even just Spawn and Forsaken in tandem. A lot to try and deal with, considering your Pistoliers are relatively low range, and just in general the ranged trade is weird because your units don't have armor or missile block chance, and therefore the higher straight DPS of the Tzeentch units will just outdamage you in many shootouts. But Exalted Lord of Change definitely taking some damage. Boris very angry about most of his army being burnt to a crisp here in Warp Fire, so he's going to try and finish off the foul big bird, at least to get that level of vengeance for the Empire. Nice little cascading fire cloak there. More melee defense and armor piercing damage. A little bit of fire there as well. That blast, unfortunately, from the Light Wizard. Just a full swing and a miss there, which is why I pretty much never take the Scroll of Blast, because it's a one-time use, and if it misses, then you just wasted that much gold, right? So Fireball comes in, hits Boris. Unfortunately, I don't think I can save my Lord of Change at this point. I did notice in a couple of replays recently, the Blazing Squealers do seem to apply Warp Flame to friendly units as well. I don't know if that's intended, but it is interesting, definitely. My Lord does end up going down, and we've got a little bit of rallying Empire troops out in this pocket. Most of my missile units are out of ammunition at this point. I've been able to refill a little bit from the Blazing Squealers on the units over here. But the Greatswords just don't have enough leadership left at this point. Too close to army losses, and there's just way too many blues there. There's, what, 145 blues even still versus 28 Greatswords and 32 spears. It's pretty hopeless just in terms of law of large numbers. Eventually, they're going to take enough hits to finish them off. Another Fireball there in the distance, smacking that Light Wizard and giving that sweet Kindle Flame to Boris. And there it is. Army losses kicks in. Going to be a victory for Tzeentch. And the Empire definitely seems like they have some tools in this matchup. But again, this is without the new mortal units that are going to be coming to Tzeentch. So it's tricky. It's definitely very, very tricky. In terms of the value breakdowns, we'll go over these relatively quickly because I do have some more replays to get to and show you guys. But yeah, blues and pinks just generally perform very cost effectively. And yeah, the little melee sweeper contingent also does quite nice. On the Empire's side, Tzeentch tends to take a lot of damage from banishment because of the low leadership of blues. So basically nothing pays for itself, even though the battle was actually surprisingly kind of close. The mortar wagon is one I want to investigate more. Perhaps if they were to significantly increase the fire rate or else drop the cost of this thing, it might actually be a solid choice in this matchup. The Hellblaster wagon is expensive enough that it's risky for sure. Definitely going to be a magnet for those blue fires from boards potentially. But that being said, if you could keep it safe and moving, it would do insane damage to the future Tzeentch halberds, and just in general give you great AoE damage against a lot of stuff that they can bring to the table. So I don't know, we'll see. It's an interesting matchup, but let's move on and take a look at another matchup that will perhaps be even more cursed. That's right, the other menfolk of the old world, Bretonnia, coming at you next. And here I am with Bretonnia, and I know what you're thinking. Lewin would probably have been pretty good here, and I was debating quite a bit on the build that I brought versus Tzeentch. You know, would Lewin be viable to take up in the air? The Lion's Shield gives him missile and magic resistance, both of which are incredibly applicable here. Self-healing and mobility also, combined with that, give him a high degree of survivability. but I just wasn't sure if I wanted to commit fully to the Air Force engagement and take, like, Pegasus Knights and Royal Pegasus Knights, because Tzeentch has a strong enough flying force. Lewin, by himself up in the air, is going to be extremely vulnerable. That being said, I kind of just half committed anyway and took a unit of Royal Pegasus Knights, Knights of the Lionhearted, and Grail Guardians. Up front, we've got some Spear Men-at-Arms and some Men-at-Arms with shields. Everyone had shields just to try and block as many missiles as we can. Got some Peasant Bowmen, Enchantress, and 2 Paladins. Blessed Field Trebuchets for some long-range pressure. Not that I should bring them. Trebuchets are absolutely awful because their accuracy is the worst. You probably just shouldn't take them in multiplayer for the time being unless you spend a lot of chevrons on them. And anyway, that's a discussion for another day. My opponent here, he's got Exalted Lord of Change, Lore of Metal, some Screamers, and Chaos Furies. No cultist shenanigans, just regular old Tzeentch Blue Horrors up front, a couple of Forsakens in the back. Got Chaos Knights of Tzeentch as well, Pink Horrors, and of course the Screamers. Screamers just being so good in this match up. Anti-large AP magic damage. While they don't have that much attack or charge, just in general, 25 bonus versus large means against something like a Grail Knight, Grail Guardian, or the Royal Pegasus Knights, as long as they don't eat the charge from those units, they should trade very cost-effectively. So we'll see. Likewise, the Lord of Change here with Lore of Metal does mean he's looking for a big Overcast Final Transmutation, potentially. And since I have, like, a lot of high-value cavalry that sort of want to operate in a blob to a degree, I mean, certainly the Fey Enchantress, like Mortis draining a blob, is the way that typically you want to use her. So it's going to be tricky for me to try and avoid blobbing my units up and getting them horribly killed by an Overcast Final Transmutation, but Tzeentch units pull up on station. We're going to feel pressure to go up and just engage here. Royal Pegasus Knights charging in the back on those pinks. Big flying force of Tzeentch coming back. As soon as I, leave my protection units away for just a moment, the cheap OP Furies are going to swoop in and start to take out my ranged units. And likewise, the Chaos Knights of Tzeentch helping to just break my front line very quickly. The low leadership of Bretonnia definitely coming back to haunt me, but really didn't feel I had any good options here. Right now, I'm doing a good job of spreading my cavalry out initially. I mean, do take a charge from the Screamers there of the Royal Pegasus Knights, but we're able to continue trading okay, all things considered. Overcast Plague of Rust there. If I had a regrowth available, but there's the Final Transmutation, hits all of my characters, hits the Grail Guardians as well, going to do a ton of damage to them, absolutely help finish off a couple of infantry units as well. So really, really nice damage, and then the Royal Pegasus Knights eventually do get a regrowth. Arguably should have just stayed in that fight, maybe try and finish those units, but a nice flanking action from these blues here, swing and a miss on that Chalice of Potions, so that's a little bit of AoE damage value missed out on. Knights of Lionhearted are also continuing to try and screen Furies from the back line, but it's pretty hopeless. I have way too many ranged units to try and protect here. And then look at the damage. The Fey Enchantress now no longer has magic resistance. Instead, like everyone else, has spell resistance. So the magical shooting of Tzeentch, bypassing her Blessing of the Lady and Guardian, just makes it very, very painful. And that Awakening of the Wood I definitely should have been using just throughout, to deal damage to the blues and also to disrupt them. So a few micro mistakes by me for sure, but when I think about from a build perspective, like what would I actually take here, especially when you consider this is without, again, the Tzeentch halberds and spears. So like the obvious infantry unit that you would take 100% in this matchup isn't even included here, and it still feels like potentially a tough matchup for Bretonnia, even without that. Maybe I'm just judging things a little too harshly because Tzeentch is very strong, and it'll take time for factions to figure out how to fight them. Certainly, we saw in a previous replay that Dwarves were able to do fairly well against Tzeentch, although I don't know if that was the most optimal Tzeentch build. Another nasty Final Transmutation here. It's my blob of characters, and that's going to be pretty much GG at this point. I'm going to throw in the towel there, as there's not a lot of point in continuing to fight. The battle is effectively over. So, yeah, feels pretty bad. I mean, granted, I definitely made some mistakes and fine-tuning builds here. I don't know, committing heavily to the Air Force, I would guess I would need to try it against Tzeentch and see how well it works. Maybe it doesn't work at all. Maybe it actually works quite well, and you just dominate the air game and then charge down, and you can take out all the blues and pinks, but then add halberds to that equation, then you're going to have to figure out how to kill those halberds. And anyway, really wish that they would just make put squires better. Like, just increase the cost, that's fine. Make them like an 850 cost unit and have the stats to match, so they're only a slight downgrade from something like Empire Greatswords, which are already not that great to begin with, but at least give you at least some mid-tier effective anti-infantry AP option to take against something like Tzeentch halberds. Foot squires, I haven't done any hard testing, but obviously I don't have the Tzeentch halberds in the build, and I'm not allowed to show them to you right now. But I mean, just extrapolating from Foot Squire's performance against Chaos Warriors with halberds, the basic version from Game 2 and Game 1, I don't seem like they would perform particularly well. Maybe I'm being a little bit too harsh, but anyway. In terms of the value breakdown here, pretty much nothing on my roster even comes close to paying for itself. I don't know, maybe just super wide with lots of cheaper knights and armor. Again, then we come back to the halberds in future. And things just feel pretty nasty. I mean, a lot of these blues and pinks trade super cost-effective. The Screamers also super nice here, both taking very little damage and paying for themselves quite nicely. So it's an interesting one. I've got one more matchup to get to for today, though, so keep it right here. And let's get to the Lizard Bros. Now I'm back in the driver's seat of Tzeentch, facing off against the Lizard Folk. In general, we got a interesting Vanguard situation here. Pretty lucky Vanguard, honestly, for me, as my Furies are right on top of some Pterodon riders. 3 Pterodons, including the ROR for my opponent here. He's got Oxyotl on foot, a couple of Solar Engines, a Skink Priest, Lore Beast, lots of cohort with Javs, and then the Red Crest up front. Yeah, Furies of Tzeentch here. Myself, and then obviously the Cultist, Exalted Lord of Change combination. We've also got some blue horrors, single pink, single knight as well this time, an Exalted Flamer, and some Spawn and Forsaken. So let's get to it. Didn't quite have enough for the Squealers, so I had to take the Exalted Flamer instead. What I was going to say is, Lizardmen generally have seemed to me to be the most intuitive. I'm not going to say the best, but at least the most intuitive against the Game 3 factions. They've been winning the most games out of the Game 1 and 2 factions, so even as that is, I do think they have some tools in this matchup. Oxyotl is an interesting one. Obviously, he's going to be relatively snipe-proof in the fact that he can just hide, has pretty low HP overall, but missile resistance of 40% and can potentially, again, just hide and dodge from the snipe. You've got, like, Mazdamundi, either on Zlok or on his chair, can have missile resistance. In particular, the chair gives him a lot of missile resistance, but not nearly as much HP as Zlok. So there's that to consider as well. Slons are going to be big, slow targets, though, so even with that resistance that they carry, could be tricky to operate. But anyway, let's get in up close. Exalted Flamer starts to unleash a little bit of warp fire through the center of the Red Crest. One thing, though, and my opponent and I definitely agreed after this particular fight that the Red Crests are a mistake against Tzeentch shooting. You know, no missile block chance, low armor, very squishy, low leadership unit means they just get hard focused right here. And while arguably this isn't the best in terms of just straight value trading, I need to take these guys out because I think they probably trade okay against the blues in melee. So definitely need to get rid of them as quickly as possible. Also just sweeping the flanks here. A little bit of Furies plus Exalted Lord of Change as a quick terror route for the low leadership of the Skinks. Summon Manticore, though, from the Lore of Beasts, Skink Priest here. It's a great way to kind of counteract some of my flying tools. And the Manticore trades super cost-effectively against the Lord of Change in melee combat. So he's going to immediately swoop down, misses the charge, overshoots. Turning back around, though, and diving in with those excellent attack animations. Manticore is still, as it always has been, one of the best monsters in the game, because it's cheap, it's quick, and it hits reasonably hard for the cost. Speaking of hitting hard, some Chameleon Stalkers emerged from hiding in the back and immediately just got mulched by Forsaken and Spawns. Unfortunately, their shock damage is really only good for breaking barrier. The low ammo count of that initial sort of explosive volley means that other than breaking barrier, it's really not going to accomplish a lot, unlike the regular Chameleons who can just keep shooting and retreating, which probably would actually be pretty decent. Yeah, maybe like a wide build with lots of Chameleons, like max out on the regular skirmish Chameleons, and then you would need the tools to protect those from something like Chaos Knights, right? Which I definitely have forgotten my Chaos Knights in the woods right here. Not that I'm needing them in particular. I mean, everything's going just fine for the most part. We've been able to beat back most of the red crest there. Another fireball swooping in, going after that skink priest. I think he's looking to perhaps summon another manticore. I'm just running disruption again with the big bird here, fighting these solar engines, getting them to not focus fire and apply that blind debuff on the units actually fighting in melee. I want my horrors to be performing as efficiently as possible against the skinks. That's kind of the whole point of the Wand of Whimsy, right? Is to help them perform not only with their ranged attacks with just Kittle Flame, but the Wand of Whimsy melee stats in particular would help the blues and pinks trade great with skinks, actually, considering their own high missile damage. But solar engines do have a lot of armor. 140 armor on them means I'm going to struggle to deal efficient damage with my missile units. I'm basically at this point just realizing, like, I'm going to probably have to just cycle charge them or beat them with army losses. So to that effect, I'm going to try and snipe these characters. But a nice zap from that solar engine hits the Exalted Lord of Change in the back. Puts him at the blinded debuff, significantly down on melee stats. Oxyotl could perhaps just stand and fight him while he is blinded. And especially 2v1 here with the Skink Priest will do okay, but cascading Fire Cloak from me and also interrupting the Solar Engine so they can't keep that blind debuff up. Going to be the order of the day. More Pawhawk Sentinels coming back. Exalted Flamer moving up, though, with the Pink Horrors. Definitely want to try and get that sweet Warp Flame effect. Lower the armor, even just that little bit of the Bastildon, but especially for the weakness to fire. My opponent engages in melee, though, with the Pterodon Riders. And, of course, more summoned Furies. At this point, Lizardmen pretty much down to just their single entities, able to chase off the rest of their army with Furies and you know, whatnot, other mobile units. Oxyotl's left. Starts relatively close to Kairos, so it's kind of a lore-friendly engagement, but just a full T-pose finish there from the Exalted Lord of Change. And yeah, I mean, again, sort of theory crafting around these matchups. I do think in all three of these games, different builds could have changed the outcome of the battle, certainly. I'm not discounting that, but again, just from an intuition perspective, a lot easier to understand, at least in my opinion, like picking up against other factions. Like, it's a lot, Lizardmen versus Khorne, relatively straightforward. You just try and beat them in melee, you know, and Tzeentch, though, just has a lot of tricks. Their combination of strong melee and strong missile units makes them a big pain to deal with. Magic is really strong. The Furies are definitely undercosted, and they're just going to get stronger with Mortal Warriors. So I'm definitely going to be advocating for some heavy balancing of Tzeentch going forward. Obviously, this balance in this build is not final, so don't take this as gospel. It likely won't go to release like this, but we'll see. I mean, I don't see them doing any significant nerfs to Tzeentch anytime soon, although perhaps, I mean, Furies just across the board I think will get nerfed, but other units, it's hard to say. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Hopefully you enjoyed this. If you like this sort of content, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that bell notification. Every time I upload a new video, you'll be notified. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.